In a fantasy setting, what would a well-to-do gentleman mercenary carry as his personal kit? Hello, this is Kyle, also known as AlienTube, and today I'm reviewing this entire kit which I've collected as a theoretical adventuring kit for a gentleman mercenary known as the Gilded Rose. The kit consists of a Tod Cutler 14th Century Quillon Dagger, an eating set by Boris Bedrosov, the Albion Mercenary, and Scabbards by Steven Huerta. I'm going to be going through and reviewing each component of this set, and there will be chapter markers in the video so you can skip to the parts you're most interested in. Or if you want to help the YouTube engagement algorithm, just watch the whole thing. So let's start by taking a look at the eating set. As I said, it was made by Boris Bedrosov, and unfortunately, I just don't know a whole lot about him. I purchased this set secondhand, so I can't say what it cost brand new. I will go ahead and put a link to Mr. Bedrosov's Facebook page where you might be able to contact him for work if you're interested. I do know this set was based on a historical find in Bulgaria. It's a bit of an unusual design because it has this two-pronged fork rather than just a single-tined pricker, which is the most common style in history. I think that actually adds to the fantasy element to it a little bit because it is a little unusual. Now they have antler scales, and the pins through it are steel with brass, brass pins also. And overall, these are just really beautiful. I really enjoy the look of the antler scales. It gives it a lot of depth to it. And I also like the brass accents. It really gives the set a touch of class. Now the knife has developed some patina already, and that's because I've used this set a few times. And one of the things I ate with it was some chicken with a wine and lemon sauce, and that acid's going to patina the knife. And personally, I think that's great. That shows that this knife is used. It's not pristine because it's actually used. The knife is well sharpened and cuts through meats very easily and smoothly. And it's also broad enough that I can actually use it to pick up some looser stuff. And that's good because this fork is a little tricky to use for picking up something when eating it. Like we had a couscous with the chicken I had recently, and this fork just does not do couscous at all. So I would actually kind of scoop the couscous onto the knife and then eat it. And it worked pretty well. The tines on the fork are a bit thick and big, and it actually makes picking up even meat a little tricky because they are big enough that they don't insert in quite as easily as the type of fork that we're used to with very thin prongs. But it still works. It came with this nice leather sheath for the eating set that the implements fit in very snugly. I can put them in all the way and they're not going anywhere. This is perfect for my fantasy mercenary because in places where you wouldn't take the sword, which is where the eating set would normally be residing, you would just take this out, tie it to your belt, and you can take your eating set into a banquet or something where a sword would not be very appropriate. Let's next take a look at the Tod Cutler 14th Century Quillon Dagger. I bought this new during a sale for roughly 110 pounds or about $150, including sharpening and shipping. Now, when you get it sharpened from Tod Cutler, he brings it to kind of sharp is what I would describe it. It's not truly sharp. It's not really going to be doing much cutting at that point. So I took it also to a local sharpener to get it much more refined edge on it. There are still some flaws in the surface of the steel from that sharpening, and I just haven't bothered cleaning them up. I don't really feel the need to. It makes it look to me like the knife has been used, which I kind of like on this one. Now for Tod Cutler daggers, I believe the blades are sourced in Asia, maybe India or China or perhaps somewhere else. But then I believe they are assembled with the whole hilt and everything in the UK. As the name suggests, this dagger is representative of what you would see in the 14th century. And Tod Cutler daggers have a pretty decent fit and finish. It's not great, these are definitely budget-oriented daggers, but the grips are usually quite comfortable. The leather seam on this one is a little more prominent than I would like, but it's not an actual problem. It's just very noticeable by touch. The blade is a little asymmetrical. There's some ripples in the surface, but none of it's too bad. One thing I did notice is that if I grip it in an ice pick grip like this for an overhand stab, this bit of the quillon can kind of dig into the palm a little bit, especially if I were to impact something. I feel like that would actually bite my hand pretty badly. If I was wearing gloves, it wouldn't be a problem, but if you're barehanded, it is something to think about. Let's take a look at some cutting footage with this. And as you can see, it stabs quite well. Cutting, not so much. I wasn't really able to get pretty much any decent cuts on water bottles. Now that might just be my lack of technique. I'm not practiced with a knife like this at all. But it also just might be that it's not sharpened as well as it needs to be to cut plastic water bottles. Let's take a look at the scabbards now. These were made by Steven Huerta, and kind of unusual for him is I did not actually have to send him the sword. I sent him the eating set and the dagger, but he has an Albion Squire line bastard sword, which is kind of the budget version of the Mercenary, and he used that sword to make the scabbard. As for cost, I didn't actually buy these from Mr. Huerta. We actually had worked out some trades. In exchange, I sent him some swords. He made these scabbards for me. But I asked him what they would cost brand new. He said the sword scabbard would be about $600 and the dagger $250. So $850 for the scabbards total. As for the design of the scabbard, I already had come up with the name of the Gilded Rose for this mercenary, and I wanted something that would reflect that. So my first thought was, rose, vines, all in gold. We kind of went back and forth on the design a little bit and eventually settled on the green stem, silver petals and thorns, and I think it came out looking great. I also specified I wanted a bronze chape to go with the whole gilded theme, and this is actually one from Tod Cutler as well. Originally, I had hoped to get the dagger and the eating set on the sword scabbard all together as by knives, but Mr. Huerta thought that the blade geometry wasn't wide enough, and with how narrow it gets, how quickly, it just wouldn't quite work out right. So we instead went with the separate scabbard for the dagger. So first off, Mr. Huerta absolutely nailed the design here. Both the design work and the execution. This is incredibly gorgeous, exactly what I was looking for. This has so much character in the design and the paint, and I just absolutely love the look. The dagger scabbard, the look is perfect. I love the way it looks. It has a bronze shape also. This is actually the shape that came with the leather sheath that Tod Cutler daggers come with. So Mr. Huerta just reused that here. And the fit is a little bit tight if I insert the dagger one way. It kind of gets stuck a little bit right there. But if I insert it the other way, it goes right in. There's no rattle, and it doesn't come out if I shake it. It's very easy to attach to a belt and wear, and don't even really notice it there. The sword scabbard, again, gorgeous. There's no rattle to it, but the fit is actually even tighter than the dagger. If I insert it the other way, it gets stuck right there, and it's not going in any further. So there's only really one way to put it in, and that's with the Albion logo facing the back of the scabbard. And even then, I have to give it a little bit of oomph to get it in. Actually, right now it's a little tighter than normal. There we go. And I don't know if you saw that, the fork comes out a little bit when I give it that extra oomph. There's a little bit of a click when I put this in where it kind of feels like it's secure, but just a bit of a push on the sword, the fork does come out a little bit. And the knife has also eked out a little bit. So they're not, the eating set is not as secure as I would like, which is a bit of a shame. And if I turn this upside down, I'm pretty confident the fork's going to come out right now. No? There it goes. So the sword fits in the scabbard a little tight, not terribly, but the eating set's a little bit too loose. And also there's a little bit of a cut or tear in this leather right where the knife blade is, which to me means it's probably a little too close. The knife blade gets a little too close to the actual leather. It's important to note regarding the fit that this has changed a little bit. I have moved since I got this sword and scabbard to a drier climate, a place where it's colder than it was normally. At least, I'm fully in the desert now, and the winters definitely are getting colder, but it's also drier. So it's possible that the wood has adjusted a little bit, affecting the fit, because I know the sword fit into the scabbard better, and the eating set fit into the scabbard a little bit better earlier. So it's also possible when the weather heats up that the fit will all get a little bit better. Another thing important to note is that, again, this scabbard was made to fit an Albion Squire Line Bastard, not the Mercenary. There are very similar blades, but they are slightly different probably. There's going to be a little bit of variance in there, so that can explain the tighter fit. I've sent other swords to Mr. Huerta for scabbards, and I've never had any problems with fit on any of those. So I think it's most likely, if really good fit is important to you, you really do want to send him your sword. So the Mercenary is representative of an Oakshot Type 15A sword. Now Albion has a good number of Type 15A swords broken into two types. One of them, which the Mercenary is representative of, is more of a hand-and-a-half sword with a somewhat shorter grip, very broad base, and even profile tapered down to the acute point. The other example would be the Tauhofer, has a slightly longer grip, but some of them aren't really much longer, but has a much more narrow blade that focuses down into a slightly more reinforced tip. Regardless of which flavor of 15A you're looking at, they are thrust-focused swords primarily. They will generally have a robust diamond cross-section, which leads to a very stiff blade and tips that are generally needle-like in how acute they are, but also fairly beefy in the thickness for durability. The idea here being that you could use this in a half-swording technique, to get into the gaps in armor in between like the plates in like the armpits, maybe in the elbows, that kind of thing, where you could push it into the mail and the acute point could get into a ring and potentially even burst it apart. Due to the aggressive profile taper making the blades pretty narrow at the point of percussion, along with the stout cross-section and generally slightly more thick blade out towards the point of percussion, these are not going to be particularly great cutters. They still can cut, but it is certainly a lesser degree of focus than thrusting. The original Oakshot Type 15A swords saw use from the late 14th century throughout all of the 15th and even into the early 16th century. These are excellent swords for the Germanic style of European martial arts. Let's take a look at the sword, starting with the hilt. The grip is the wasted offering from Albion. Now, for the Mercenary, they offer wasted like this one, a tapered one, or wasted with half-wire grip. Personally, I would have loved to have the half-wire grip, but it adds an extra $220, and since I bought this sword secondhand, it didn't come with a half-wire, so not an option, really. But I definitely prefer the wasted shape to the tapered. Now, I've reviewed a decent number of Albions on this channel, and something that I feel like I might have glossed over a little bit in other reviews is just how good their leather work is on the grips. The cord wrap texture is immaculate. The risers are incredibly crisp and well-defined. The transitions between the pommel and the crossguard, they're all just beautifully done, incredibly comfortable to use. And the leather work is so important for swords. The grip is the primary, practically the only interface for using a sword, at least for the vast majority of the applications. And too many lesser cost swords don't pay enough attention to the grip. They will just kind of slap quick, easy, cheap leather on it and call it done. And that's just it's nowhere near as effective of a grip as when you put some care and time and attention into it. Now this is something of a shorter grip at about 6.5 inches, which means it's definitely on the short side for two-handed use. Now the pommel adds another about 1.5 inch of grippable space, which is just enough to get two hands comfortably on it. And it's effective both one or two-handed. I can actually wield this just fine one-handed, but in two hands, it is quite comfortable. And speaking of the pommel, it's a sense stopper style, which is my absolute favorite style, especially aesthetically. Now, I have noticed with some scent stoppers that this ridge right here can kind of grind into the hand a little bit when gripped, and it can be a little uncomfortable. This one, not the case at all. It is chamfered beautifully and smoothed over, so when I have my left hand there and I'm gripping it, it doesn't hurt at all. Even if I impact on a bad cut, it doesn't bite into the hand. It's also just beautifully shaped. It's all very smooth, very even polish. The lines are very crisp without being sharp, and it's just a beautiful pommel. I really appreciate it. The peen is ground smooth, and it's a little sloppier than you would normally see on an Albion, but that's because shaping a peen on this kind of rounded, bulbous section is actually really difficult. So it's a lot better than you'll see on just about any other production sword. It's just a little bit sloppier than you would normally see on an Albion. And the crossguard is this pretty minimalist design of a simple upswept guard with slight swelling out at the tips of the quillons. This is actually one of my favorite crossguard styles. It's simple but elegant, and I really like it. It's one of the reasons I think the Mercenary is one of the most attractive 15A swords Albion offers. The finish, just like the pommel, is very clean, very smooth, very even, and the gap where the blade meets the crossguard is, I would say, perfect. I don't think you'll ever find a production sword with a smaller gap than this. It is outrageously good. And the entire crossguard is chamfered nicely. There's no hot spots. The entire grip and hilt is masterfully crafted to aid in edge alignment, keep the sword locked in the hands, and it's just incredibly well done. And now it's time to talk about the business end, the blade. As usual, here's my measurement diagram. So the blade starts out at 2.5 inches wide with a very even profile taper down to the extremely acute point. The distal taper is pretty complex, with sections of rapid and gentle distal taper. It starts at 6 millimeters at the base and ends at 3 millimeters just before the tip. The hilt percussion node is in the upper portion of the grip, exactly where you want it, and the percussion node in the blade is at about 20 inches, where the sword is around 1.25 inch wide and about 4.5 millimeters thick. There's not a lot of flex to the blade, and that's what you would expect for a thrust-focused sword. Something I mentioned before, I believe in the Alexandria review I did, is how good Albion is at nailing their specs. The Mercenary's specs compared to this blade are practically spot on. There's tiny differences here and there, but honestly that's probably my flaws in measuring more than it is Albion missing the specs. The shaping of the blade is phenomenal. There's absolutely no ripples anywhere on the blade. Everything is beautifully symmetrical. The finish is incredibly even, a beautiful satin, and everything is just, it flows beautifully. The tip is well formed, although there is a tiny bit of damage to it that you can see in these close-ups. That is, I believe, from the previous owner, who said he didn't really do much, really any cutting tests, but that he did do some thrusting, and I believe he did some thrusting against some hard targets, which caused that tiny, tiny bit of deformation there. There's also some scuffs in the finish up near the tip, probably also from his testing. Going back to the satin finish on this blade, it's the best I've seen on an Albion. I've reviewed a good number of them, and none of them have been this consistent, this clean. This is incredibly well done. The edge beveling, as you would expect from Albion, is absolutely beautiful, with one smooth grind all the way from the spine to the edge. There's actually a little bit of apple seeding. You should be able to see it in this footage. But how sharp is it? Let's take a look at some paper cutting. So when I do paper cutting tests, I just insert the sword to the paper and then just kind of drag the sword along, see if it will cut. And there, it did a little bit there towards the tip, and then it started getting stuck very easily. Let's try the other side. Kind of the same thing. This part up here is close to sharp, and then down here it starts getting considerably duller. It's taking a little bit more force for me to cut than I would like. And then if I just try to cut from the edge, it's not going to cut at all. It kind of just pushes the paper down. Doesn't cut at all. It's not particularly sharp up here. It's sharp enough to kind of cut the paper, but it's requiring a bit more effort than it should. And once we get down to about here, it doesn't cut at all. Let's take a look at some cutting footage. So obviously I didn't do a whole lot of cutting with this sword, and that's because it's just not a very good cutter. That's partially because it is a thrust-focused sword. However, I have other thrust-focused swords, such as my customized Albion Talhoffer, my Lockwood SL1014, that cut well, and this one doesn't. Why is that? Well, as you saw in the paper cutting, it's just not very sharp. It's not really sharp enough to do a good job cutting into plastic water bottles. Since I bought this sword secondhand, I can't say if this is the level of sharpness that you can expect from Albion. I hope it isn't. I would hope that they would deliver a sharper sword than this, but I can't say for sure. Thrusting, on the other hand, with this sword is very easy. It penetrates into targets extremely easily. Point control is outstanding, and overall, it is a great thruster. And now it's time to talk bottom line. There's a lot of components here, so I'm going to go through each one individually. First off, the eating set. Unfortunately, I don't know what the brand new price was, so I can't really give a verdict on if it's worth that price. I can say I absolutely love it. It's beautiful, the knife is effective, and I really like that it's based on a historical find. So although I can't give an actual verdict on the price, I can definitely say that I really like this eating set, and it seems like Boris Bedrosov might be a great choice for this kind of tool. Next up is the dagger. The total price for this was $150 plus I think it was $20 I paid the local sharpener for the additional sharpening on it. And the thing is, there's not a lot of good quality daggers in this price range. Generally speaking, you're looking at Tod Cutler, and that's about it. Most other daggers from other companies either aren't very historical or are just cheap. So I really appreciate what Tod Cutler does to get a good variety of historical-based daggers in an affordable price range. So yes, obviously I think it's worth that price. Next up, let's talk about the scabbards. The sword scabbard would be about 600 new and the dagger 250. To me, they are worth it. Now, there is a little bit of fit issues here with the blade and the eating set, but they don't particularly bother me, especially because, like I mentioned before, I think the climate has affected them a little bit, and I'm kind of expecting them to fit better as it warms up a little bit. But besides all that, Mr. Huerta just absolutely nailed the look I was going for with this set, and the scabbards really are what make this set what it is. Otherwise, it would just be, an Albion Mercenary, an eating set, and a Tod Cutler Dagger. It doesn't come together as the Gilded Rose set without the scabbards, and I am beyond pleased with what I got from Mr. Huerta. I love his work, and I can highly recommend him as a scabbard maker. And lastly, the Mercenary. This costs 880 new in this configuration from Albion. And I think this is one of the best executed Albions I have reviewed. The symmetry, the finish, everything about it is just beautiful. They did an absolutely superb job on this sword. It is a joy to pick up, to move around, and the only downside to it that I have is that it's not sharp enough. Now, first off, I don't know if that sharpening issue is due at Albion or if potentially the previous owner ended up wearing away at the edge a little bit. But I could fix the sharpening, whether sending it to somebody, taking it to somebody, or learning to sharpen myself, which is something I want to do. I can fix sharpness. You know, the end user can fix sharpness. I don't think you should have to, but you can do it. But even if this is the level of sharpness that it would come from Albion, I think it's worth the price. Albion has a decent number of models at the $880 price point, and I think they are an absolute steal. Albion's fit and finish and attention to detail is just outstanding, and I absolutely love being able to get a really excellent sword for less than $1,000. So yes, obviously, I think this Mercenary is worth the $880. And that's going to wrap up this review. I hope you've enjoyed this little peek into kind of a fantasy character that I've come up with named the Gilded Rose, and kind of my thought process on how to build an entire set of adventuring gear. Thank you for watching this video, and until next time, Alien 2 out.